Um, we're very fortunate to have as our speaker. Oh, somebody just came in. Peter. All righty. Dr. Barbara Forrest. We're delighted to have her. She's a professor of philosophy at Southeastern Louisiana University. I guess emeritus now, huh?
I am so happily retired for 3 years now, but I have not been made emeritus.
Okay.
Just
And she,
retired.
alrighty, she co-wrote a great book, Creationism's Trojan Horse, The Wedge of Intelligent Design with Dr. Paul Gross. And Barbara was a key witness, of course, in the Kitzmiller versus Stover Area School District 2005 court case that put the kibosh on intelligent design. And so that was 15 years ago, last December 20th.
That's
And
right.
I'm hoping she'll tell us all about how the Thomas More Law Center filed a motion to have her excluded as an expert witness, and all the background details and gossip of the ID trial of the century, I guess you could call it. So, Barbara, you're just going to be speaking. You don't have slides or anything.
Oh no, I was.
Oh,
Okay.
I
If you
am.
need any picture help, just call out something, and I can display it on the screen if you need a
Well, I was
visual assistant.
okay. I was hoping just to keep this really informal.
That's fine.
You gave me a sort of a general topic of, maybe what's been going on since Kitzmiller. If you want to hear the story though that you brought up about how the other side tried to get me kicked out. Did you want to hear about that?
A little bit, sure.
Well, I was initially called as a witness in this trial because of the book that I co-authored with Paul Gross, Creationism's Trojan Horse. Paul and I had written that book. It was published in January 2004, and we wrote the book with an eventual lawsuit in mind. We knew that there would eventually be a lawsuit because the Discovery Institute. Everybody knows what the Discovery Institute is, right? Everybody who's here?
Yeah.
Never heard of it. Never heard of it.
Well, no, you've been buried under a rock for 20 years.
No.
So everybody knows who they are. Does anybody not? Oh, okay. The Discovery Institute is a conservative think tank in Seattle. It was established in the early 90s, 90 or 91. And it was established by a guy named, oh gosh, I can't remember his name, Bruce Chapman, who wanted his own conservative think tank. So he went to Seattle, and he was involved in a number of things like transportation issues in Seattle, and actually did some pretty good work, civic work there. But in the mid-90s, he set up a subsidiary or an arm of the Discovery Institute called the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture, which later was shortened to the Center for Science and Culture. And that became the national headquarters of the intelligent design creationism movement, right there in downtown Seattle. So
can I just add a comment here? The idea of a conservative think tank is inherently an oxymoron, because if you start with a conclusion, you're not thinking at all, you're rationalizing. It's like saying a conservative or a liberal economist. A liberal think tank would be just as much of an oxymoron. It's not because it's conservative, it's because if you start with a conclusion, you're not thinking.
Well, he started off, actually, he was housed at the Hudson Institute, but he wanted his own establishment. So he set up the Discovery Institute. And they, in 96, that went online, and they published their 20-year strategy in a document called the Wedge document. And I was the one who was able to authenticate that it was really their document. It was leaked by an office worker. And once we started looking at it, people wondered if it was genuine. So I was the one who was able to poke around and get into one of their old directories and establish that a lot of the text in that document was on an early website. So anyway, what they did was to start promoting intelligent design as a new scientific explanation for changes in life forms. And it was from the very start, it was, they were advancing it with the goal of getting it into public schools. And my friends in New Mexico know all about this because they had to fight this fight out there. But what they were also doing was shopping around, hoping to provoke a lawsuit. They were shopping around for a court case. They wanted one that they could control, where they would be the primary people steering the lawsuit. They didn't, but what they didn't expect was that somebody else would provoke a lawsuit that they could not control, and that was in Dover, Pennsylvania. And Paul and I wrote our book with the goal of presenting a thorough analysis of intelligent design from every angle in the event of a legal case. So we wrote it primarily with a legal case in mind. It was published in January 2004, and by December 2004, there was a lawsuit. This case came out of the Dover area school district in Pennsylvania. It was initiated by the school board there, the school board members. The court case was that the school board initiated a policy in which they would make the students aware of intelligent design as an alternative to evolution. And they bought a whole bunch of textbooks called Of Pandas and People and put them in the school library as a reference book. And what they were doing was trying to, the school system needed new biology books. And so the school board there tried to pressure the teachers into accepting an intelligent design policy in exchange for getting their new books. So that's what this lawsuit was all about. 11 plaintiffs in this tiny little town of Dover. Dover's only about 3,000 people, but 11 people came forward as plaintiffs. That's a huge number of plaintiffs. So that's how we got the court case. These parents, and some of them were teachers, filed a lawsuit. And the Discovery Institute was having kittens out there in Seattle because this was a lawsuit they had not foreseen. It explicitly mentioned intelligent design, which upset them because by this time, my book had been published, other books had been published, and intelligent design had been thoroughly exposed as a form of creationism. Just the newest, to make a bad joke, which by now is very stale, the newest evolutionary variation of creationism. That's what it was. And so when we heard about the lawsuit, I emailed some of the, one or two of the attorneys that I heard about who were involved on behalf of the plaintiffs and told them, that I had a book that might be useful to them. And they said, we've already got it. You're already on our radar. So that's how I got into I was called as a witness because of the information in my book and the research I had done, which was to establish that intelligent design is merely creationism. Its history is traceable right back to earlier forms of creationism. So this book really was a thorough analysis of intelligent design, both scientifically and from every other angle. Financially, everything. So I was the one whose job it was to tell the judge, to explain to the judge why intelligent design is just another form of creationism, so that what the Dover School Board was promoting was creationism. That was my job. So I was supposed to testify in, the trial started in the end of September. I was supposed to testify early in the trial, but I was delayed by Hurricane Katrina. I couldn't get out of Louisiana for about 3 weeks. So by the time I got there, most of the excitement was over. Most of the TV crews had left. It was much quieter. But while I was stuck in Louisiana, I noticed that the Discovery Institute was attempting in various ways to discredit me. One of the things they did was to post a radio interview that I had supposedly done which they put a transcript up, and it turned out to be a complete, what would you call this? A spoof, not a real transcript. It was
Fabrication.
a complete fabrication. They were referring to me as Dr. Barking Forrest. And so I thought that wasn't really going to help their case. So I didn't worry about that too much. It was just such a juvenile thing. But what they did, the Thomas More Law, let me explain that the Discovery Institute tried to get the Dover School Board to throw that policy out or to rewrite it. And the school board would not do it. So the Discovery Institute was stuck with having to defend their own concept of intelligent design in a case that they did not want. They either had to agree to cooperate or refuse to get involved, in which case they would look like hypocrites. So a couple of their fellows ended up as expert witnesses. Michael Behe, Steve Fuller, I don't think he was a fellow, but he was one of their fellow travelers. And several of the Center for Science and Culture fellows, formally affiliated fellows, were supposed to be expert witnesses, including William Dembski, who was one of the founders of this movement, or one of the founders of the Center for Science and Culture, who attended my deposition. And he was supposed to be I was deposed on June the 6th, I think. And he was supposed, which was a Friday maybe, and he was supposed to be deposed on Monday. Well, he attended my deposition, and so he knew exactly what I was going to say in court, because he was there when I was put under oath and cross-examined by the Thomas More Law Center head attorney, Richard Thompson. The names are sometimes beginning to recede to the back of my mind. So sometimes I have to dig around for the names, but Richard Thompson. So Richard Thompson cross-examined me, and Dembski knew everything I was going to say in court. And by Monday, he had pulled out. He would not be deposed. So several of them pulled out rather than participate in the trial. They knew ahead of time what my testimony would be, because when you are deposed, that deposition is based on your expert witness report. And you can't say anything that's not in your expert witness report. So they have a copy, the other side has a copy of the report. And they know everything you're going to say on the witness stand. And they try to trap you into making inconsistent statements. So that's what that's all about. So when I got there finally, about, oh gosh, I think it was, I don't know, 2 weeks into the trial or something like that. The Thomas More Law Center, working on this with the Discovery Institute, I'm sure, they tried to have me, they tried to prevent me from being seated as a witness. And all of this took place the first morning I was in the dock in court when I sat down in the witness chair. They challenged my qualification to be an expert witness on the basis of a 1993 Supreme Court case, Daubert versus Merrill Dow. And that was a case in which a lawsuit was filed over a drug given to pregnant women called Bendectin. It was for morning sickness. I remember because my sister took it. And it was reputed to cause birth defects, and a lawsuit was filed. And that lawsuit generated a ruling in Daubert, called Daubert versus Merrill Dow, which requires federal judges to establish the genuine scientific credentials of people who are called in to testify as scientific expert witnesses in a case involving science. So they challenged my qualifications on the basis of that Supreme Court case, but it didn't apply to me because I wasn't called as a scientific expert. I'm not a scientist, and I wasn't called in that capacity. So the judge tossed out that challenge, but it took half of the first day for that to get settled. So by lunchtime, the judge had ruled that I could stay in as an expert witness. So that's what Dave was talking about. They tried to get me, and I was the only woman expert witness, and I was the only one they tried to get kicked out. But they were trying to get me kicked out, not because I was a woman, but because my testimony would be the most damaging to them. So that's what Dave was talking about. And part of the slide he has behind him was my testimony about how the pandas language, the early manuscripts of pandas was written, the early manuscripts were written as creationist, overtly creationist manuscripts. And when the Supreme Court outlawed the teaching of evolution in the Edwards versus Aguilar case in 1987, which came out of Louisiana, they changed the wording to intelligent design to try to skirt around that Supreme Court case. So anyway, I've spent a little bit of time, but that's the story, the backstory of what Dave was referring to. Yeah, Dave.
So was this the info for the graph there? Was that like part of the book, or was that obtained during the trial?
That was a slide made especially for the trial.
Okay.
What Nick Maskey did, I think it was Nick that did this. Some of our, whippersnappers at NCSE, what they did was to do a word count with a computer, and then to generate a chart showing how the language changed precipitously after 1987. And I think that part's behind your head.
Yeah, let me pull it up here.
Yeah. So you can see where the graphs crisscross. It was beautiful. What we didn't use, I have to tell you, when I was going through those manuscripts, you could see where they had done a search and replace on the old, on the early computers. There you go. There you see they crisscross. That's when the language changed, 1987. There you go. Right there. Yeah. The language, the creationist words were scrubbed out, and the intelligent design language was literally put in every place where they scrubbed out a creationist term. They put an intelligent design term, some of the language related to intelligent design. So I was going through one of those manuscripts one day, and I found where they had insufficiently erased the word creationists and had inserted after the C, they put intelligent design, and it had STS. So intelligent design was plugged right in the middle of the word creationist, and they didn't erase the C or the ST. So it was could design proponents. So they were, instead of creationists, they wrote design proponents, but they didn't get rid of the beginning and the end of the word creationist. And that was the smoking gun. But what was ironic is we didn't use that in court. It just kind of fell through the cracks because we were advised by one of the senior lawyers not to throw everything we had at the judge, give him a selective representation of the evidence that we had. And we were just working so hard. It just only fleetingly crossed my mind that we should include that. And I wish, if I could go back and change one thing, it would be that I wish we had. But anyway, that's the backstory. What I was thinking of doing was telling you guys some of the stuff that's happened since the trial, if you're interested. Okay, so one of the things that happened after that trial, which was in 2005, was that the Discovery Institute started, they couldn't promote intelligent design. That term was completely discredited, and they knew it. So they had to resort to the use of code language, and they began promoting what they called academic freedom legislation. They had started doing this in 2004, but they really ramped it up after 2005. And it was language, it was a legislative template written in code language, which was really not new. Creationists had been using these code words for a long time. It was things like the strengths and weaknesses of evolution, critical thinking concerning evolution, arguments for and against evolution. So anything they could say to undermine evolution without overtly referring to intelligent design. And various versions of the bill were introduced in state legislatures in several states in the country. And the first state that passed one of those legislative model bills was my state of Louisiana in 2008. So we now have on the books what is called, they scrubbed the language when the first draft of the bill was the Louisiana Academic Freedom Act. But the word academic freedom was a dead giveaway because by that time, I and everybody else that was involved in this knew exactly what that meant. So when a few of us in Louisiana, and when I say few, I mean very few, went to work to try to fight that bill. They scrubbed the language, they sanitized it, and it got renamed as the Louisiana Science Education Act. And it got passed in 2008 because it was introduced in 2008 because that was the first year that Bobby Jindal was elected governor. And I don't know if you know who Jindal is or was, but he was a really horrible governor who was in bed with the religious right. And he was working hand in hand with an organization called the Louisiana Family Forum, which is one of the family policy councils associated with the focus on the family. So they got that bill passed, and it is on the books in Louisiana since 2008. Now, the good news is that that bill, which is one that permits teachers to bring supplementary material into the classroom that undermines the teaching of evolution. Teachers in Louisiana have mandatory state science standards. They are required to teach to those standards. And evolution is in our standards. It was then, and it's in our new standards now. But it permits teachers, in addition to using the state required textbooks and other materials that are mandated to teach to the standards, they can bring in supplementary materials that encourage critical thinking about evolution. And of course, we very quickly exposed that as a creationist code word, but we failed to get the bill to stop the bill. We never had a chance to begin with. So anyway, it's on the books. The good news is that that bill doesn't require any teacher anywhere in the state to do anything. It's a permissive piece of legislation, not a mandate. It doesn't mandate anything because they knew that they could not get away with that. Now, since that bill has been on the books, we have not had a single complaint of any teacher using that legislation overtly and invoking it to teach intelligent design. That's not to say it's not happening. We just have no reports that that the law has been specifically used to, the law was passed to protect teachers that were already doing this. So we haven't had any reports, and there have been no lawsuits, and teachers pretty much have just ignored this thing. The other good thing is in 2016, I believe, the science standards were rewritten in Louisiana. They were delayed due to Hurricane Katrina. And the Discovery Institute has a follower down here. He's a creationist biology teacher at a Baptist college called Louisiana College, who got himself appointed to the Standards Review Committee and tried to challenge. We have a very good set of science standards as a result of this revision that was finalized in 2016. And they tried to get, weasel words placed into the standard, and they completely failed. The teachers who were on these committees, the working groups, and the teachers who were the high school science teachers, the middle school science teachers, who were on the writing committees and the standards review committee, absolutely were not having it. So they failed. So they, things have been very quiet in Louisiana creationism wise. And that's the good news. That's one of the things that's happened since Kitzmiller. Now, the state of Tennessee adopted a similar bill. In fact, they adopted a bill that was identical to the first version that was introduced in Louisiana. And the governor up there wouldn't even sign it. He allowed it to become law without his signature. So it is on the books. But we're just not getting reports that these laws are being used to teach intelligent design. So I think most teachers are just ignoring them. So that's what's happened in Louisiana. I thought I would sort of update you on things that have changed at the National Center for Science Education, if you would like to know about that. National Center for Science Education, I assume you all know what that organization is, right? If not, it's a clearinghouse in Oakland, California. I was on their board from 2004 to 2017, so I've been off for a few years, but I was on the board for 13 years. It's a national clearinghouse for anybody who needs help defending the teaching of science. And what we ended up becoming after our establishment in the late 80s was just, an organization devoted to fighting creationism. Well, that has changed. And in great part, that was due to our success in Kitzmiller. We have largely taken the wind out of the sails of the Discovery Institute's effort to promote intelligent design. I mean, it's just sort of not going anywhere. So what happened at NCSE was we were getting urgent requests from climate scientists to add a climate science initiative at the National Center for Science Education. So that's what we did. So now that's a big chunk of what goes on at NCSE. And we have, the thing that I will mention is that we have some very distinguished board members that represent the climate science community. One of them is Ben Santer, who is at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in California, who was on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, whose work established a way to detect the human fingerprint in climate change. In other words, to separate out the human contribution to climate change and to distinguish it from the natural changes in climate, which is an extremely important piece of work. And so he's on our board. If you will remember when Trump first got elected, Ben Santer was the scientist who stepped up and defended what they were afraid would be attacks on climate science, and he got a lot of publicity. He was on talk shows. I mean, he got a lot of prominent publicity because of his courage in standing up to defend climate science. He's on our board. The other person on our board, by the way, Ken Miller is the president of the board, and he was one of the expert witnesses with me in the Kitzmiller trial. 3 expert witnesses were NCSE board members. Ken was not on the board at the time, but the three of us on the board were expert witnesses. Another of our NCSE board members is Michael Mann, the very famous hockey stick climate scientist. I think he's at Penn State, if I'm not mistaken. He's the one who was sued in an attempt to discredit his work, and he won that lawsuit. Another very distinguished person on the board as a result of our adding the climate science initiative is Naomi Oreskis, who is co-author of that wonderful book. She co-authored with Eric Conway, Merchants of Doubt. She's a Harvard historian of science. So that's the biggest change that was made while I was on the board, was to add the climate science initiative. And here's the interesting thing. As a result of our success at NCSE in helping to stop attacks on evolution, which we hardly ever were getting any calls about anymore, we had to figure out a way to change the organization to ensure its survival. And so the Climate Science Initiative really has helped bring in new supporters for NCSE. And the other thing we did, we are now, when I say we, I sort of still think of myself as, as one of them, even though I haven't been on the board for 3 years. We have now some programs doing literally proactive. We figured we need to be proactive instead of reactive. And so we were able to develop some initiatives that were part of NCSE's mission at the very beginning of its founding, and that was to be a resource for teachers in teaching good science. So now we have that. We have teacher ambassadors, and I think you have a couple of those in New Mexico. Young science teachers who are teacher ambassadors for NCSE, who help them develop lesson plans, who test those lesson plans in their own classes, and who do outreach to other teachers. And they do presentations at the National Science Teachers Association, for example. So we now have that proactive arm in which we use really great young science teachers. We have one in Louisiana named Blake Touchette, who teaches science at a little high school down in Vermilion Parish, Louisiana. And he's just a wonderful young man who is excellent science teacher and is representing NCSE as an ambassador. There's also a graduate student fellowship for graduate students around the country who are in areas where there are not very readily available science resources to the communities and to the schools. And so we have now graduate students, PhD students, who serve as resource people and do community outreach in areas around the country. So that's made NCSC a very different organization from what it was when the Kitzmiller trial came up. So that's been a positive development after Kitzmiller. You might also like to know what's changed at the Discovery Institute. They have really, to the extent that I even watch them anymore, which I used to check them every day compulsively, check their website. And I finally broke the habit. But they have changed as well. One of the things that happened was that some of the people who were actively involved in promoting intelligent design and were involved in some way in the Kitzmiller effort left. One of them was William Dembski, who just sort of dropped off the planet for a while, and just he got out of the Discovery Institute and just kind of disconnected and didn't do much of anything that we could detect in terms of promoting intelligent design for a number of years. And they also, one of the departures was Casey Luskin, who was at the trial for a good chunk of the time and was sort of running interference for them in Harrisburg during the trial. And he also came to Louisiana to promote the piece of legislation that I was working against. Well, Casey left. But now there's been a slight change with respect to both Dembski and Casey. Casey left and we didn't know where he went. Casey Luskin was sort of their utility infielder. He kind of did whatever they needed him to do. And he had a master's degree, I think, in geology from the Scripps Institute. And he went and got himself a JD, a law degree in California, was a member of the California Bar, has never practiced law. And then when he left the Discovery Institute, we didn't know where he went. Well, it turns out he went to the University of Johannesburg and has earned a PhD in geology. So we think that maybe he has done that with the idea of re-entering the circles of people promoting intelligent design. We don't know yet. We just know that he has earned a PhD. We don't know what his plans are. Dembski has re-entered.
There has been some recent chatter that he's back at the Discovery Institute, and you won't find it on their webpage yet.
No, he's not there. The only place I could find anything, and I think it was Glenn Branch who put me onto this, there's a Japanese Amazon page promoting a book called, it's Perspectives. Hang on, I have it here somewhere. It's Perspectives on Faith and Science. I think it, oh, here it is, here it is. It's a book called The Popular Handbook of Science and Faith. And he shows up on that webpage, which is the link that was sent to me as having a PhD in geology. But that's a Japanese page advertising this book. And I can't find him on the American page at Amazon showing him related to that book. Dave, do you know anything about that? It says that he's associate director of the Center for Science and Culture, but he's not listed. Like Dave said, he's not listed there on their website.
So I'll check into some of the leads that people were thinking he was back at the Discovery. I think somebody called them up on the phone and said, "Hey, can I speak to Casey?" And they said, "No, he's not in right now."
Oh, not in right now. Well, maybe he is coming back. No, he's not listed as an associate director. In fact, John West is the associate director. So Casey may be coming back. Dembski is back. Dembski's on the board of directors of the Discovery Institute. He is also now affiliated with something that the Discovery Institute set up called the Walter Bradley Center for Natural and Artificial Intelligence. And he's one of their distinguished fellows. So now he and a number of other familiar names are involved with this new center at the Discovery Institute. And I think they're trying to sort of jump on the artificial intelligence bandwagon. For a while, they were into bioinformatics with, concerning which Dembski has absolutely no expertise whatsoever. Dembski is a mathematician and a philosopher like me. But now they have this new initiative called the Walter Bradley Center for Natural and Artificial Intelligence. And Dembski is affiliated with that, and he's on the Discovery Institute Board of Directors. So Dembski is back, and he's also going to be one of the speakers at a program down in Texas, I think, next month, which is very typically at a church, which is where they do all of their, their talks. After Dover, they just dropped any pretense of being scientific and started, having, all of their events seem to be held in churches. So Dembski's on the roster of speakers at an event coming up in a church down in Texas.
Is he still at Baylor?
Oh, no. He got kicked out of there.
Okay.
Yeah, he was Dembski, that fell through long ago. So, and what happened to Dembski after that, he had a couple of little dipstick jobs, and neither one of the teaching jobs, and neither one of them lasted very long. He was at a Baptist Theological Seminary in Kentucky. He was on the faculty there. And then he was on the faculty of some little, I think it was an online evangelical school in North Carolina. But after that, I don't think he's had a real job. I think he's destroyed any prospects he had for a respectable academic job after Baylor. I think he really destroyed any credibility that he even thought he had. So, but he's back with the Discovery Institute. That's probably the only viable affiliation that he has left that's available to him.
There is one intelligent design person left at Baylor, Winston Ewart.
Yes, and he's involved with this Center for Natural and Artificial Intelligence. I noticed his name as one of the people involved in that. Yeah. He's the people that Robert Marks is the program director. Robert Marks, Dembski set him up in a job at Baylor, and I don't know if he's still there. But Robert Marks had set up a bioinformatics center or something at Baylor. And Winston Ewart is affiliated with the Walter Bradley Center at the Discovery Institute. So yeah, that's the familiar name. Another one that's probably rings a bell is Jay Richards, who's one of the early founders of the Center for Science and Culture. Walter Bradley, who I think is retired now, but he's one of the distinguished fellows. Brendan Dixon, who was affiliated with the Biologic Institute up in Washington State, and one of the very early people involved with the promotion of intelligent design, Judd McCosco. So there are some very familiar names with this Walter Bradley Center for Natural and Artificial Intelligence that they've set up at the Discovery Institute. One of the things I noticed, a couple of other things, is that their funding is up between 2016 and 2018. 2018 is the latest financial information that I have on them, and their funding is up. Their net assets in 2018 were almost $7 million. But what's interesting is between 2016 and 2018, they cut their funding for the fellowships for the Center for Science and Culture in half, and they're giving a lot of money to Rice University for research. And that was one of the other things I wanted to tell y'all about. The connection with that may be, there's a chemist at Rice University by the name of James Tour. Has anyone heard of him? James Tour? He seems to be a very distinguished chemist, except that he also dabbles in, I had thought of him as the fellow traveler, of the Discovery Institute. And I think that's still pretty much what he is. I was interviewed a few weeks ago by a very nice scientist named Josh Swamidas. Dave, do you know him? Josh
Yeah,
Swamidas?
he's on like the Panda's Thumb crew.
Okay. Well,
yeah, he's a good guy.
He partners with a scientist named Nathan Lentz, and they found my work and wanted to interview me on the anniversary of the Dover trial. And so Swamidass did the interview. Nathan Lentz couldn't come because of family emergency. So, and during the interview, Swamidass asked me about James Tour and mentioned his work. And I knew about Tour. I hadn't done any recent research on him, but I knew that he was a fellow traveler. And he asked if there couldn't be some, Swamidass asked me if I thought that there could be some useful contribution that intelligent design could make to scientific research. And of course, it's been well established by many, many people that they never have and they never will, because what they're promoting isn't really science. It relies on the foundation of the supernatural. Well, what he mentioned to me with respect to James Tour was that the Discovery Institute was funding his research. And I did not know anything about that. So my response was, well, if they are doing, and here's a real scientist, he's doing real science research at Rice University. Couldn't the Discovery Institute be doing something useful? And I said, well, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with the research that he produces and what he allows them to do with the research that he produces. And that was about as much as I could say. So after the interview, I did a little digging and I found out that James Tour is his sort of, he's been sort of, I guess, in cold storage. And every now and then they bring out a new person when they want to present what looks like a new face, in their effort, the Discovery Institute. And he worked with them to produce a new edition of an old creation. It's an old book about the origins of life called The Mystery of Life's Origin. And that book came out in 1984 and was written by some of the people that ended up helping to found the Center for Science and Culture. One of whom was Walter Bradley, one of whom was Charles Thaxton. And so James Tour has helped them produce, Discovery Institute has published a new edition of that book. They have their own press, by the way, this Discovery Institute Press. And Tour has been very much involved in that effort, which shows that he is helping them. And this is only circumstantial evidence, but in their 2017 and 2018 IRS 990 forms, I found that the Discovery Institute has given two grants totaling $471,542 to Rice University for research. So that looks like it might be what Josh Swamidass was talking about. I can't find any direct documentation that they are funding Tour's research, but they are giving money to Rice University. So there may be, some connection to Tour. It looks circumstantially plausible, at least. So, but they have really slashed the funding for their Center for Science and Culture fellowships that they were giving to people to promote intelligent design. And I think that's an interesting development. So that's what's changed at the Discovery Institute. So I know you guys are finished at 9. So can I get in something a little different to close out? Something I really want to let you guys to mention? Do you have time?
We could go another 20, 30. Oh, I'm muted? Okay. We
No,
could
I
go
hear you.
another 20, 30 minutes.
Well, the thing, I think I've told you everything I wanted to tell you about, new developments since the trial. And I want to mention something that every time I don't get around much anymore. I'm so happy being retired. I've sort of taken myself out of the fight. But I do get people call me every now and then. And in the writing that I did up until my retirement, I was really heavily involved in my scholarship and trying to show the placement of creationism within the larger efforts by the religious right nationally. Because what intelligent design amounted to was the Discovery Institute's logistical contribution to the religious rights efforts to get a foothold in public education and get intelligent design into public schools. That was part of their strategy in the Wedge document. And I think it's extremely important now that attacks on evolution have largely dried up. in public schools, attacks on the teaching of evolution. I'm talking about formal, organized attacks like you guys in New Mexico had to fight, and that we've had to fight. Those are pretty much dried up. But the creationists are people with connections and associations to a very sinister effort, which is nationwide. And that is the effort to, I have written about one aspect of that, and it's called Dominionism. And that is the effort by, it's the most extreme arm of the religious right. Dominionists are people who literally are trying to control every institution in the United States, government, education, the arts, the media, literally everything. And they have been working very steadily. And if you've paid attention the last 4 years, very successfully in order to do this. And with the creationists in Louisiana are some of the best examples of this that I can give you, because we have been in the thick of it down here. And I've written a lot about it, and I'm going to show you, give you a reference in a minute to the last publication I wrote about that. And it's very recent, it's 2019. I mentioned the Louisiana Family Forum, which is an affiliate of Focus on the Family. They were very close allies of Bobby Jindal, who was the governor here from 2008 to 2016. And Jindal was a born-again evangelical Catholic. He referred to himself that way. And he gave the Family Forum a great deal of influence. They predated Jindal. They were established in the late 90s, but Jindal was their man. And they became they are a lobbying group, and they are, in terms of their power and their clout, they are second only to the oil and gas industry in Louisiana. And that outfit was established it was founded by Tony Perkins. You guys have heard of Tony Perkins, maybe, who runs the Family Research Council up in Washington, DC. And he is from Louisiana. So, but the executive director is a man named Gene Mills, who is a Pentecostal preacher. And he hides his tie, well, he had been hiding his ties to the more fundamentalist arm of Pentecostals, and attempting to, he is a lobbyist, he's a very successful lobbyist. And they, during Jindal's 8 years as governor, they turned Louisiana into a de facto theocracy. They got their way on almost everything. And they have very close ties to the person who has occupied the White House for the last 4 years. And so I wrote an article about how a group of people who started out in Louisiana, they started out as an anti-gay marriage group. They hate gay people. And they very quickly, after their founding, began promoting creationism. And they spent a lot of time doing that for years. And so my article shows what Dominionism is, how it was got into Louisiana politics, how it became powerful, but all of the different aspects of this, of what creationists were doing besides creationism in Louisiana. They got involved in an attempt to gerrymander the state, to redistrict the state, to, if I can say one thing that's partisan here, to favor the Republican Party. So this is, if you want to get a sort of a miniature view in Louisiana, because Louisiana is a small state, of what the other things that creationists are involved in nationwide and at the national level. This is the article that I wrote. It's called "Gimme That Old Time Dominionism," and I wrote it for a publication called the Bayou Brief, which is an independent news website in Louisiana. So if you're interested in reading that, there you go, Dave. And it really got the Family Forum's attention. They were really upset because they knew that I was really exposing exactly what they were up to as Dominionists. Gene Mills is a Seven Mountains Dominionist, which is part of the New Apostolic Reformation. Sarah Palin was involved in that. If you remember that she had some fundamentalist religious involvements. And so the New Apostolic Reformation is a type of dominionism that has its roots in the neo-Pentecostalism of the 1980s. And what they're trying to do is to get a grip on every major institution in American life: government, education, business, the arts, everything. It covers everything. And in Louisiana, they achieved a good deal of success. And so what I did was to write an expose of Gene Mills as a dominionist, so that people would recognize this movement and recognize the involvement of these creationists in all of these other aspects of religious right activity. Another interesting thing, which you guys probably know, Dave, you probably know, is that Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, is a creationist who bought some land in Colorado where some fossils were found and sold the land to Answers in Genesis, and did not declare the income from that sale in his disclosures. Do you know about that? Yeah, Mark Meadows. I can't hear you. I can't hear. Can you guys hear me? I don't hear. Oh, Dave,
Well,
you must.
I was muted. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just looking up that Meadows article. But yeah, we heard about that.
Yes. So so I think it's very important to understand that creationism is part of something much, much, much bigger. And these people have achieved a great deal of success over the last 4 years. Now, with the new administration coming in, it's going to be interesting to see what they find to do after January 20th. But they have achieved a good deal of power, more power than I've ever seen in my professional career at the national level. So I think it's important to understand that creation has other involvements as well. It's not just promoting creationism and intelligent design. It's this other stuff too. So I will end. Yeah, there you go. That's it. And the Salon article was based on an earlier article that was either in the Washington Post or the New York Times. I can't remember, but it was a major news venue about his involvement in this creationism thing out in Colorado. So anyway, these people have managed to make great gains in the last 4 years, but not in the classroom. And we're very happy about that. Not in the classroom. There seems to be a good deal, the support for teaching evolution is increasing. The teaching of evolution based on research done by the National Center for Science Education in connection with a couple of other researchers that published on, there was an article by two scholars, and I had their name on the tip of my tongue. Hang on. I'm always forgetting it. It was an article published in 2007. Let me see if I can find the name here. Hang on just 1 second. The names are, let's see. Plutzer. Eric Plutzer was one of them, but he had a co-author whose name started with a B. They wrote an article in 2007 showing that about 60% of science teachers simply don't get very involved in the teaching of evolution because they're unsure of how to do it, and they're afraid. Well, that is turning around probably as a result of a lot of publicity that article got, and the adoption of the next generation science standards around the country. And so things are looking up for the teaching of evolution. And you can go to the NCSE website. It's ncsc.ngo, and you can find all this information about how things are actually looking up for the teaching of evolution. My last thing is I'll show you something that I wrote in which the research that I found also looks promising for the teaching of evolution. The last scholarly article that I published was in this book It's called Making Sense of Science and Religion. It was a book that was written for science teachers. It's an anthology. It was published by the NSTA Press. The editor that I worked with was Professor Joseph W. Shane, who I believe is a chemistry professor. He really wanted to have something for science teachers. And every article in this book is aimed at the science teaching community. And I was asked to write something about intelligent design, creationism and evolution. And so I wrote an article called "The Arc of History Bends Toward Teaching Evolution." I think that's kind of a lame title, but my editor liked it. I was stealing from Martin Luther King. Really the indications are based on demographic changes that there is the acceptance of evolution is increasing in this country. And it's primarily because of changes in two demographics. One, an age demographic. There are more young people now, 20 somethings, Generation Xers, I guess, whatever you call them. Their numbers are increasing and they are much more in favor of science and much more inclined to support the teaching of evolution, so that the numbers are looking up. The other thing is the increase in the number of non-religious people, the increase in the number of people who claim to be secular. I count myself among those people, so now we are close to 20% of the population. And that is the changes in those two demographics are I think are boding well for the teaching of science, not just evolution, but climate science as well. So I think things are trending in a positive direction. So I guess I'll stop there because that's something good that I can tell you about. But I would like to make another plug for the book because it's really well done. It's a series of articles written for science teachers. So if you know any science teachers that are interested, it's Making Sense of Science and Religion. Joseph Shane is one of the editors, and it was published by the National Science Teachers Association. So it's a very, very good resource for teachers. Okay, so I'm happy to sit if you have questions, or I'm happy to say goodnight and go.
I'm sure we'll have a couple questions. So
Sure.
I've put the link to the Amazon where you can buy that book on the chat.
Thank you. Yes,
And there's quite a few fun things on the chat. Jack Jakowski still sees ads on TV for the ARC. So Coffee Brown had a question. The ID people use many techniques which suggest they know they are a con, but the energy they put in suggests sincerity. How do you read them? Are they in it for the money? Are they zealots? Do they just want notoriety?
I'm sorry. I was distracted by the chat. The chat.
Okay, well, this is in the chat at
ask me that question again. I was reading something that Jack
7:44 p.m. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Ask me your question again.
Okay, I was just reading Coffee's question from the chat at 7:44. So the ID people basically they use techniques that suggest they know it's a con, but the energy they put in suggests sincerity. So how do you read it? Are they in it for the money?
Yeah, I have said for many years that there might be a few true believers there. I think Paul Nelson is a, he's a young Earth creationist, and I think he probably believes a lot of what he says. I think some of these other guys, I think they know that they're snowing people. I think they have always played their supporters for chumps. And I think that they simply were interested in promoting an idea that would allow them to make cultural inroads. So I think if I understand the question correctly, I think that they make a good show, and maybe some of them are sincere. I don't know, but at this point, who cares? Well,
a lot of them have planted a seed that grows very productively amongst the Republican Party.
Yes, they have, and if And I think since you brought that up, I'm going to expand on that a little bit.
Good.
It is very rare that you see Democrats involved in this stuff. Once I've seen maybe 2 or 3 in my whole career, and one of them was in Louisiana, and he was the sponsor of the legislation. It was Senator Ben Nevers, who is a Democrat. But he's kind of an odd bird because he's a Democrat because he was pro-labor, and he was, he did a lot of things to help labor unions. And so he stayed in the Democratic Party, I think, because of that. But from a personal standpoint, he was a religious right guy, and he was, every chance he got was trying to get religion into the public schools. But other than I know of very few Democrats that have ever been involved in this. Once in a while, you see one pop up. But the Republican Party is the anti-science party. It is the party that has rejected modern science, except when it comes to getting the shots. And then the politicians go line up for the shots, if you've seen the news recently. But we're unfortunately, one of the things we used to talk about at NCSE, the difference between the attacks on evolution and the attacks on climate science, the study of evolution is something that's absolutely crucially important to understanding biology and doing biology properly. But the attacks, the attacks on it were not changing the way science was done. And it wasn't, if you understand what I'm trying to say, a matter of life and death. It wasn't, that kind of urgency. It had, the attacks on the teaching of evolution had long-term consequences for the education of children, which we were going to pay for somewhere down the line. Whereas the attacks on climate science are attacking an area of science in which we have to proceed with urgency, because it is literally is a matter of life and death on this planet. And so that's a little bit different. But no matter what you're looking at, attacks on evolution or attacks on climate science, you're pretty much looking at the Republican rejection of modern science. Climate science is a little different. There are more other people involved. It's not the attacks on climate science really do not emanate originally from the religious right. They jumped on the bandwagon. They were happy to do that. But those emanate from people who don't like government regulation, largely.
But what about the Cornwall Institute, or whatever they call themselves? Or Conference, Cornwall.
I don't know much about that. We know more about the Heartland Institute that was attacking climate.
Well, no, this one purports to be a religious-oriented thing.
Yeah.
They say we can't have climate science, for example, because God won't let us do anything that will hurt us.
Oh, well, you
and they have scientists, Roy Spencer, David Lee Gates, who has been hired in NOAA recently as the chief. I started to say the chief scientist, but it was something else having to do with instrumentation and gathering of data. But he is in a position to blight a lot of science being done at NOAA if he stays in that position.
Right. Well, one of the things I can tell you about what's going on in Louisiana is that the Family Forum, Gene Mills specifically, they have their fingers in a lot of pies. And Gene Mills, of course, is sympathetic to the attacks on climate change. That is actually mentioned in the Louisiana Science Education Act. It mentions global warming as one of the things that they, were seeking to undermine the teaching of global warming. And in the case of the Louisiana Family Forum, its executive director Gene Mills, as best as I can determine, is an extreme he's a member of what is called the State Policy Network, which is a nationwide organization that promotes extremely conservative economic positions. Free market fundamentalism is the best way I can think of to describe it. it is his free market fundamentalism that leads Gene Mills to seek to undermine the teaching of climate science. It's not so much his religious views in Louisiana as it is his anti-government views and his anti-government regulation views. And what's interesting is, and this is the sinister aspect of what organizations like the Family Forum are doing, they are using the democratic process in order to advance their goals. So what they're doing, ironically, is using the mechanisms of democracy to undermine democracy, because these people are not, they don't look kindly to true democracy. They are very authoritarian, which is why they get along so well and have achieved so much influence in the Trump administration. They are highly authoritarian, but they have used the irony of democracy is that it permits people like this to use the mechanisms of democratic government to achieve power. And in Louisiana, they did that. Now, under our current governor, they have quite a bit less influence because our current governor is a Democrat. And so quite a bit less influence on most things. And it would be nice if this didn't boil down to a partisan divide, but it actually does. In reality, it's the anti-science effort is a Republican effort. I have some wonderful friends who are Republicans and they don't share these views, but so not all Republicans are anti-science, but almost all the anti-science people are Republicans. So unfortunately.
Hey, are you familiar with Keith Stanovich?
No.
He's a social psychologist. He's in Canada, and I can't remember exactly which university, but he has co-authored a book called The Rational Quotient. And anyway, after the election of Donald Trump in 2016, in 2017, he posted an essay. I haven't found any follow-up to that, but the title is, "Were Trump Voters Irrational?" And then he goes on to say, no, they weren't. And then he throws out the red herring. And on the other hand, some of the non-Trump folks are also irrational about or he doesn't say also irrational. He says they are also anti-science in the form of vaccination opposition. And that's an interesting essay. If you have an idle moment, you don't want to throw things at the wall in, you might look at it. I can't make any sense out of it. Some of it has to do with a definition of rationalism that is bifurcated. You have motivated rationalism, which is what the Republicans and the anti-science folks do, and you have accuracy motivated rationalism, which is what most scientists I'm aware of do. Although I know of, not personally, but I know of a number of people I can name by name who are not accuracy motivated in commentary on science, particularly climate science.
Anti-vaxxers are actually a different group. Being an anti-vaxxer does not particularly predict your party. And in fact,
no, I'm aware of that.
For alternative medicine people in general, it doesn't particularly predict party.
No, I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
But the point that the reason why he brought it up was to say, well, I mean, you've got other people on the other side, on the liberal side, so to speak, that are violently or near violently anti-science as well. So it's, everybody does it one way or the other. So Trump voters are rational. And I'm not going to argue, wait, I'm not going to argue the point that Trump voters were or were not rational. What I'm trying to say is this guy, this social psychologist who has a considerable reputation in the field of that, and on the point of rationalism, rational thought and so on, posted this thing because a lot of people assumed that he would be opposed to to the election of Trump, and he's saying, well, nah, maybe not so much.
Well,
So I'm just offering the thing. If you feel challenged by what I've said, I'm not challenged because I think it's a bunch of bull, but look it up. It's in a very obscure, to me anyway, very obscure website. Starts with a Q. I can't remember the rest of it right now, but I can give it to Dave, and he can post it.
Jerry, I'm not
recommending it as anything more than an intellectual exercise to find the holes in his argument.
I'm not challenging you at all, Jerry. I'm actually going where you wanted to go, which is,
Okay.
I want to point out the fallacy of that argument, which is the fallacy of false equivalency.
Oh,
It
yeah.
is
sure.
true that categorically, qualitatively speaking, every error that one side makes, the other sometimes makes as well. But
Oh,
for example, when Attorney General Barr compared a mask mandate with slavery, that was clearly a false equivalency. On the floor yesterday, one of the Republicans was saying, well, didn't a congressional, a Democratic representative say, we should go to places where Trump gatherers meet and make them uncomfortable? Okay, I wouldn't agree with doing that. I would say that that's a little bit of an overreach, but is that in any way comparable to storming the Capitol with weapons, Ziploc handcuffs, Molotov cocktails, and hangman's nooses? No, it's fucking not. So the logical fallacy of false equivalency is one that's really enjoying some prime time right now and was embedded in the case that you were quoting from.
If I could jump in, because I'll have to go in the next minute or two, so I'll just close out with this. One of the things that we noticed at NCSE was that anti-science when it comes to vaccinations falls on both sides of the political spectrum. And we found that. In fact, we were trying to think of people that we knew would be favorable to the teaching of evolution, who would serve as kind of informal ambassadors, or people that would sort of talk up NCSE. And somebody mentioned Bill Maher, but the thing that prohibited us from going to Bill Maher was the fact that he's an anti-vaxxer. And so you find, I read something somewhere where you can find, a heavy concentration of anti-vaxxers anywhere within a mile of a Whole Foods.
It kind of makes sense. Yeah.
But you also find it, among creationists. We have that here. The Family Forum has promoted anti-vaccine propaganda. In fact, one of their people, a guy named John Aller, who was actually a young Earth creationist who was affiliated with, I think he was had some connection to Answers in Genesis. He was one of their guys.
He used to be at UNM. He used to be from New Mexico.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's right. He was at New.
Yeah,
he's actually trained. He's a linguist. I mean, his training is in linguistics. He has no scientific training of any kind, and yet he turned part of his professional life at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette into promoting the idea that vaccines cause autism. In fact, he even had Andrew Wakefield in Lafayette at a conference that he organized. And so the Family Forum has promoted anti-vaccine propaganda. So that they do that too, but you don't find, that's not unique to the right. But that's kind of a, I'll just close with this. One of the things that we used to worry about with respect to attacks on evolution and the undermining the education of Americans about evolution was the long-term effects of it, because this has been going on now since for 100 years, since the Scopes trial. And I think now what we're seeing is with the ignorance about the coronavirus and the rejection of science, that it has reached the point, the rejection of science and the teaching of evolution, it did generate, I think it's anti-science has reached a point now where it is a danger to human well-being. we see the results of the rejection of biological science and the ignorance of biological science. We've got people, I live in Louisiana, and there's a lot of anti-science here. And I mean, a lot. And we have people here who are like all over the country who don't understand science, and they think that the virus is not much more than the flu, or that it's, depending on their political leanings, they think it's a hoax. So I think that we are now, with the coronavirus crisis, we are seeing the results of the rejection of science that has been taking place over the last century. And it's got to the point now where we're seeing the urgency of this problem. So anyway, it's almost 9:30.
Barbara, I know Sylvia has been trying to ask a question. You got time for one more quick question?
Sure.
Oh, Sylvia, unmute yourself. Oh, you're not muted. Okay.
Is that, oh, I see. Is it the one about Amy Coney Barrett? Is that the question?
We can't hear you, Sylvia. But it doesn't look like you're muted, but we still can't hear you.
Is that Sylvia we're
I
seeing?
bet it was. So she wanted to know Amy Coney Barrett, new Supreme Court Justice, is she part of the Dominion group? I think
She's
that was
Catholic.
the question.
Yeah, she's Catholic, and she's from New Orleans. She's from Louisiana, and she came from a home that promoted an extremely right-wing form of Catholicism. So she's not. The Dominionists are Protestants, pretty much. It was generated out of a form of Pentecostalism. However, this is interesting, and many people may not know about this. The evangelicals and the Catholics formed a partnership in 1994. They formalized their partnership in a document called Evangelicals and Catholics Together. You can look it up on the internet. It was an effort that took a while to work out because of the theological differences among the Catholics and the Protestants. But some very right-wing Protestants, among whom were Bill Bright, who founded Campus Crusade, I think, for Christ. He's dead now. And some really right-wing Catholics. They hammered out a partnership based on the things that the areas they agreed to overlook their theological differences in order to work on the things where they thought alike, one of which was abortion. And so Catholics, since 1994, Catholics have worked hand in hand, right-wing Catholics have worked hand in hand with the Protestant religious right to advance a common agenda. And so, but you don't see, you do see some Catholics involved in creationism and intelligent design. Michael Behe is a Catholic. But the Catholics, by and large, tend to stay out of the creationism issue on a large scale. But Amy Coney Barrett comes from a very, very ultra right-wing form of Catholicism. So now that, having said that, I'm sure she shares a lot of the goals of the Dominionist group. They have a lot of commonalities, and they partner specifically on the abortion issue, on the anti-gay issue, things like that.
Okay.
Well, so
all right. Well, that was a splendid discussion.
I have a correction.
Okay.
The organization I was talking about before, their official name is the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. So there you are, Barbara.
Okay.
That's a tie. But it has a number of prominent scientists, climate scientists, that affiliate with it directly. When I say a number, it maybe it's 4, maybe more. It's not a number that takes both hands and toes.
Okay, I know very little. I've run across the name of that organization, but I really don't know enough about it to say anything intelligent. So
Yeah. It's a simple URL. It's cornwallalliance.org.
I just want to mention that Jack Jakowski put an ad up about Dembski. Does Dembski have a website? Or I know he has the website, BillDembski.com. I don't know. I haven't looked at that link, but Jack put up a link that looks interesting. Intelligent Design Retirement Repudiation. I haven't seen that. I just know that Dembski dropped out of sight for a while. And I think that one of the reasons was that intelligent design wasn't really going anywhere anymore. He had just kind of exhausted his contribution to that. And he had some rather urgent personal reasons for dropping out. I think he has a severely autistic child. And I think he probably had to help get this young man raised, and he had 2 other children. But he has re-entered, he's back in circulation, but I have not seen that link. But anyway, it's been very nice talking to all of you. I hope I haven't bored you too much.
Oh, it was fascinating. So we'll be posting this on the YouTube. So if your friends missed it or you want to watch it again, we'll have it on the YouTube, and I'll take the links that people have put on the chat, and I'll add them to the YouTube info, so you can get those links from there. But it's been delightful. I'm sure glad you could come.
Thank you so much. It's been a nice way to spend an hour and a half. I enjoyed it. Nice to see all of you. I have fond memories of New Mexico. I really love Santa Fe.
All righty. We're sorry about John Aller.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, I think he's pretty.
I've seen him in person, and he's just obnoxious.
I don't disagree. He's a pretty difficult character.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good night, everyone.
Good night. All. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.